I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you focus so much on a thing that you kind of miss the big picture of what was going on. I would imagine you've probably been in a scenario like that. I have an attention issue. For those of you who didn't know, it's not that I don't have the ability to focus on things. It's that I don't have the ability to focus on things I don't want to focus on. And when I do focus on a thing, the world ceases to exist. All right, so it's all or it's nothing. If you're not aware, that's a diagnosable thing known as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Not an inability to focus, an inability to regulate your focus very well. So the faucet is either all the way on or it's all the way off, right? What that means is that there are often times where I might be so hyper fixated, hyper focused on a thing that I miss the bigger picture of what's going on. You may or may not have an attention focus issue, but we all run into situations at times like that where that is the case. And that is a particular dynamic that can come into play in significant ways when we read and approach the Bible as well. So we've been in this series called The Good Shepherd for a few weeks now, and today we are finishing it up. And as I was preparing it, I kind of had a couple different overviews of the series and thinking about just different ways I could work through it. And initially, I didn't have a wrap-up series, but the more I ran down the rabbit hole of kind of figuring out what are we going to do with this, the more I realized we need a week to take a step back. Because now for 4 weeks, we've dug into individual portions of this 6-verse psalm. And we've talked about some really important stuff. We've broken down like individual elements, but what I don't want to happen is I don't want us to come out of this series and go, well, we learned a lot of kind of micro things about the 23rd Psalm, but we never took a step back and said, what's it about as on the whole? Because the reality is what we've done the last few weeks isn't the way David wrote the Psalm. David wouldn't have gone through and written the Psalm by kind of breaking it down on the micro level that we have. He wrote a Psalm that intends to communicate one thing, and inside it there are other things we can learn. In other words, what I want to do today is I want to take a step back and look at the 23rd Psalm as a whole and say, let's not miss the forest for the trees, but instead, let's ask the question, what does this Psalm really communicate? What is its purpose? Why is it important overall? So, let's read it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This psalm is doing two really important things. The first thing that it's doing, I understand David is a poet. He's a songwriter. And as any poet or songwriter will tell you, the goal of what they do is to connect with human experience. That's what makes poetry, that's what makes music such a universally beloved artistic expression. Because when an artist writes a poem, or when a poet writes a poem, when an artist writes a song, when it's really, really good, it connects with us in a way that very few other things do. It connects with our lived experience as humans. It connects with moments that we've had. We're able to see ourselves in the art. So on one level, David is doing exactly this. He's identifying a fundamental human experience, and he's writing about it. Now, he writes from his perspective, from things he knows, from that of being a shepherd and sheep. But what he's writing about is fundamentally about this deep existential thing that we all experience. A search for peace. I've never met a person in my entire life who has said, you know what, I don't really care about peace. I don't really need it in my life. I'm fine with just chaos all the time. I mean, no matter how chaotic a person is, everybody wants peace. Everybody wants calm. Everybody wants the green pastures and the still waters. There's a reason why this psalm resonates so much. Because David is writing about this existential search for peace. And David also is wise in that he doesn't just write about peace, he writes about the things that prevent us from having peace. He writes about the valley of the shadow of death. He writes about there being enemies. So David he's not superficial in the way that he writes about life. He's real. We want the green pastures and the still waters. We don't want the valley of the shadow of death. He writes about fear. He writes about these things that we all understand on some level. And when we leave the psalm, we find ourselves in this place, at least I do, of going like, I want that. So it's powerful because David as an artist, as a poet, connects with a very deep human longing for peace. And that leads to number 2. Because fundamentally what David does as he writes about peace here is he doesn't write about an unattainable thing, he writes about an attainable thing. But David understands something critical to the search for peace in this life. What David understands is that peace is not a thing that we search for and attain through our own striving. What David understands is that the only way to have peace in the midst of all things, in the midst of the valley of the shadow of death, in the midst of fear, in the midst of enemies, David understands that the only way to have that is for there to be someone who is bigger than those things that we can look to. He identifies that person in the psalm as the Good Shepherd. But fundamentally, this psalm is not about a shepherd. It's not, which might seem funny after calling the sermon series The Good Shepherd and talking so much about shepherds. But if we rewind and we reread the very beginning and the very end of this psalm, you'll see something interesting. Psalm 23 verse 1 starts with this: the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd. And then David goes through this beautiful poem. And then at the very end, Psalm 23 verse 6, he writes, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. David is writing from his experience, that of being a shepherd. As any good artist does, he writes from what he knows. But David is not fundamentally writing about a shepherd, he's fundamentally writing about a God, a Lord, an authority. He's fundamentally writing about someone, not a shepherd, but someone who is bigger than all the other things. The Hebrew word that David uses when he writes the Lord in both cases is the same word. It's the word Yahweh. If you're not familiar with that word, that is the Hebrew word used throughout the Old Testament to refer to the God of the Israelites. It's the name that God gives himself when he reveals who he is to Moses way back in Exodus. It's a really cool word, and I would love to do just a whole sermon just on this word. It's fascinating on this name. In Hebrew, they don't have vowels. In ancient Hebrew, there's no vowels, there's only consonants. And so God's name is YHWH. It's Yahweh, right? And one of the really neat things about this name is that in Hebrew, it was seen as a breath. Yahweh. Yahweh. In other words, God is the very breath that we breathe. He's the source of our life. He's the ruler of all things. He is the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. This is not just a shepherd. This is not just a Lord that David is writing about. This is the Lord. We talked briefly in one of the weeks about how Lord is a word that culturally, historically was used to just talk about an authority. We think about it as a deity, but that's not actually at all what the ancients would have thought when they used the word Lord. They would have thought about an authority figure. They would have referred to many different people throughout their lives as my Lord. David doesn't write about a Lord, he says the Lord. He uses God's proper name. Yahweh is my shepherd, the Lord, the God above all other gods, the King above all other kings, the shepherd above all other shepherds. See, fundamentally, this entire psalm is about an authority, a ruler, a king. David continues this same train of thought in another one of the Psalms that he wrote, in another one of his poems. In Psalm 56, David writes this: "When I am afraid, not if, but when I am afraid, I put my trust in you, in God, whose word I praise. In God I trust and am not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" David is a fascinating character. I did an entire sermon series on David several years ago. He's my favorite character in the Bible outside of Jesus. David is fascinating. What David does critically throughout the Psalms specifically is he writes about real life. He writes about fear. He writes about being overwhelmed. He writes about being overcome. He writes about being in these dark, ugly places. And without fail, every time David writes with reality about the situation that he finds himself in. And then he says some version of, "But I trust in you. And yet I trust in you. But I know that you are." David is realistic about life. He's realistic about struggle, and David went through some stuff. But within it, David had this very special and unique ability to turn from what he saw and what he experienced and remember who God is in the midst of it. And the 23rd Psalm is as good an example of that as there is. Because David writes about the valley of the shadow of death. He writes about fear. He writes about enemies. And yet what he does fundamentally is he says there is a Lord. There is a king. There is a God who is above everything else. And what David does is he identifies in this psalm that no matter what we face, there is peace available when God is in his rightful place in our life. When he is the Lord. See, for a sheep, the sheep didn't really make a choice about who had authority over them. The shepherd had authority. David, as a shepherd, understood this. David understood that when he took charge of the sheep, they didn't have an option. They didn't get to choose a different shepherd. They were assigned a shepherd. But David understood that as people, we are not assigned a shepherd. We get to choose ours. And we all choose. David understood that while a sheep would be assigned a shepherd, that shepherd would take the sheep, they would go out on a journey, and there were no other options on the journey. They couldn't follow one shepherd one day, another shepherd the next day, another shepherd the next. That wasn't the way it worked. David understood that as people, we have that option, and we take that option all the time. David understood that while the shepherd had the ultimate authority over the sheep, as people, we get to choose day in, day out, moment in sometimes and moment out, who it is or what it is that we place as the Lord of our lives. And as humans, we vacillate and we jump and we go back and forth. And sometimes we follow the Lord and sometimes we don't. In fact, often for many of us, we don't. We like the Lord. We believe in Jesus. We trust him. But often what we do is we place ourselves in the position of Lord. Or we place our families in the position of Lord. We place our children in the position of Lord. We place our jobs in the position of Lord. We place fear in the position of Lord. See, the reality is whatever it is that determines the decisions we make, that thing is the Lord. That person, that circumstance, whatever it might be. And for David, what he understands is that this fundamental search for peace, it is not found through finding a specific location, through changing our circumstances, through getting a different job, it is found when the one who is above all of that is the only authority in our lives. Because that Lord, that shepherd, will lead us to those places. See, we do this funny thing as people where we think we know what's best for us, and the truth is we're terrible at it. We think we know what's going to bring us fulfillment. We think we know what's going to bring us joy. We think we know what's going to bring us contentment and peace and satisfaction, and we pursue those things, and yet they're empty. Not entirely, to be clear. Many things that we pursue are good things. Many things that we pursue are good things. But they are not ultimate things. They are things that will fail us in one way or another one day. You can have the greatest family in the world. You can have an amazing spouse, amazing children. But what happens when tragedy strikes your family? What happens when something terrible happens and you lose someone? Or what happens if, in the worst of scenarios, you lost all of them? What then? Did they fail you? Well, no. But they are not ultimate. Everything, every person, every circumstance, everything in this world will fail us at some point because it is all temporary. What David writes about is something that will never fail us because he is not. David says you want to have peace. You want to have contentment. You want green pastures and still waters. You want the restoration of your soul. Then the thing in which you put your faith must be ultimate. It must be eternal. It cannot be a thing or a person because everything and every person will fade or will fail. But there is a shepherd who won't. I think for David, if he could just summarize all of this, I think what David would say is that we don't find peace by removing fear. I think he would say peace comes when we surrender to the King. See, for most of us, our journey toward peace, or what we want, what we think peace is going to come through, most of it is driven by a removal of the things that scare us. We try to eliminate what scares us because we think if we can eliminate what scares us, then we won't experience fear any longer. But we can't. There will always be things that scare us. There will always be things that we do not want to encounter. I'm not a person who tends to feel fear in a very extreme way. I tend to be pretty even-keeled. I tend to not worry too much about what could happen. And yet there are plenty of things that scare me. I'm just really good at burying my head in the sand. Some of us are not. Some of us, we whatever scares us, we wear it on our sleeve. It's all over our faces. It consumes our lives. For somebody like me, it might read like I'm not that afraid of things, but the reality is I'm just better at burying my head in the sand than some other people. And when that thing that scares me confronts me and I can't bury my head in the sand any longer, I'm just like anybody else. Some of you are like me, some of you are not. Some of you are like my wife who, when she's scared, everybody knows. Something's not right. We fear all kinds of different things. Some of us fear things that are crazy. My family's getting ready to go to Colorado on vacation this year. I cannot wait. I'm so excited about it. I've been to Colorado, to the Rocky Mountains several times. Vanessa's never seen the Rocky Mountains. When I proposed the idea of going to the Rocky Mountains, she's only ever been to the beach. And her comment to me was, but I live in West Virginia. I grew up with mountains. And I said, no, we are not talking about the same mountains. I cannot wait for it. Vanessa's greatest fear in the world is snakes. Okay? Wouldn't you know that last week there was an article that she came across on Facebook about, some of you saw this, you know where I'm going already, about a mega den of rattlesnakes that's currently, they're hatching. Thousands of rattlesnakes in this one location. And it'd be one thing if they were like, well, yeah, it's in this city and it's, the northwestern corner of the state. But instead what they did was they said, we won't disclose the location of the mega den. So as far as Vanessa's concerned, it's 10 feet behind the cabin we're staying at. Scared to death. Like, don't worry, if the Megaden's there, we'll get a refund from Airbnb and we'll sue them and make a lot of money. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. It's not there, I promise. Fear, right? To be clear, I don't want to be next to a mega den of rattlesnakes either, at all. But I'm just burying my head in the sand about it, because that's better. Is it? It wouldn't be if we got there and the mega den of rattlesnakes was right there. Look, the point is, some of us operate one way with our fear, some of us operate another way, but the reality is for all of us, we do whatever we need to do to try to remove that fear because we think by removing the fear we'll find peace. But the truth is, peace doesn't come when we remove the fear. Peace comes when there is a king, a ruler, an authority who is bigger than the things that we fear. Parents, we understand this dynamic somewhat intuitively. I think most people do, but parents in particular. When my kids were younger, especially, my kids are all afraid of thunderstorms, which drives me crazy because I love them. Like I love having the windows open and hearing the thunder and the rain. Like I love it. And my whole family's like, shut the windows. Shut the windows, it's thundering. Like, when my kids were little in particular, when they would get scared, maybe by something like a thunderstorm, I would kind of grab their shoulders and I would say, hey, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at daddy, look at daddy. Look at me. We're okay. You're okay. Right? Now, I don't have authority over the thunderstorm, but I am a person in their life who has the ability to impart my calm onto them. And there's something that is fundamentally calming about looking to someone who is an authority over you when you're freaking out and seeing, hey, they're okay. And if they're okay, then that must mean I'm okay. Right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, is fundamentally David writing about being able to look to the Lord, to Yahweh, to the God above all gods, the King above all kings, the one who has authority over everything, being able to look to him and see, well, he is not shaken, he is not moved. What scares me doesn't scare him because he's bigger than it all. We don't find peace by removing fear. Peace comes when we surrender to the King. Now, this is a principle that is played out all throughout the Bible. I mean, beginning to end, like cover to cover, this is there. There's a couple of really interesting stories in the New Testament that I want to show you quickly. We're going to move pretty fast through this. But there's a couple really interesting stories where we see this exact dynamic at play. And what I want you to notice as we read through these is I want you to notice the fear versus focus component, okay? Sometimes we pit fear and faith against one another, and there's an element of that that's true. We're not going to dig too deep into that today. But what I want you to notice is I want you to notice the difference between the fear and the focus, where people's eyes are looking in these stories. First one we find in Matthew chapter 14. Jesus is interacting with the disciples, and he was teaching, and as we enter into verse 23, we find it says, after he had dismissed them, so after Jesus had dismissed the people he was teaching and the disciples who were with them, he went up onto a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat, which contextually we don't have, but Jesus had sent the disciples across the Sea of Galilee. Okay, so they were on a boat. The boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Now, real quick pause. Many of the disciples, several of the disciples were fishermen. They were fishermen who fished the Sea of Galilee professionally. Now, these were like they knew how to handle a boat. They knew the Sea of Galilee. They had been in storms on the Sea of Galilee. Okay, this is not like I don't like the wave pool at Zambezi Bay, okay? I'm not a great swimmer. I can swim, but I don't tread water well. Leave me where it's calm, right? This is not me on a boat. This is like hardened fishermen on a boat. So it's buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified because, of course they were. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." What a dumb thing to say. How about, "Lord, if it's you, just why don't you walk over here so I can see you a little better?" You know what I mean? Like, what in the world is Peter doing? I hear your voice. I think it's you. Just get a little closer. So Jesus goes, "Bet." Now, if you're not familiar, that's a new term the kids use these days. Bet. "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. What? Oh, man. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." When he saw the wind. In other words, when his focus shifted from Jesus to the circumstances around him. And so immediately Jesus reaches out his hand and he caught him and he says, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" The word doubt used there means to waver or to hesitate. The Greek word, to waver or to hesitate. In other words, what Jesus said is, hey, you were looking at me because you trusted me. And then you noticed the stuff around you that, by the way, was already present. The wind was already there. The waves were already there. But why, after you were looking at me, did you turn away from me and look at the circumstances around you? Why did you waver? Why did you doubt? I think for David, as he writes about the valley of the shadow of death, why would we doubt? When he writes about in the presence of our enemies, why would we doubt? Because what David understands, and what frankly Peter understood, is that Jesus is bigger than those things. God is bigger than those things. And yet, built into us as humans is this inability to just stay focused. Because our circumstances scare us. Because the things around us make us nervous. I mean, in this case, it makes sense that Peter would have been scared, although it doesn't say when he noticed he was walking on water. It says when he saw the wind. Let's look at another example. This is the same kind of dynamic. It's Jesus, it's the disciples, there's a boat, the Sea of Galilee, okay? It's a very similar situation. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with them. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him, and they said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" So again, we've got the disciples, hardened fishermen, storm. They're scared. But notice, this is very interesting, notice the way they address Jesus in this moment. They don't say Lord. They don't say Jesus. They say teacher. To be clear, Jesus was their teacher. But it is fascinating to me that in this moment, when they're terrified, they forget who he is. Because he is not just a teacher. He is not just Jesus. He is the Son of the living God. So Jesus gets up. He rebuked the wind and he said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." And then the wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified. Because again, think about what just happened. On the one hand, this is an amazing moment, right? It's easy for us to read it now, 2,000 years later, and go, how cool, Jesus calmed down the storm. But if you went outside the next time there was bad weather, and you heard somebody say, "Quiet, be still," and it got quiet and was still, you wouldn't be like, "That's amazing." You would do the exact same thing the disciples did. They were terrified, and they asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." See, this is power on a level they had never experienced. This is authority to a degree that they could not wrap their head around. In this moment, it's like it almost clicks for the disciples, like, we know this guy is different. But this is different on another level. See, we can learn a lot from these two stories because what the disciples did in these stories is what everyone does. We focus on the things that scare us. We focus on the things that fear us, that make us fear, forgetting that we serve someone greater than all of it. And here's the reality of what happened on the boat that day. The disciples got scared. They said, "Teacher, do you not care if we drown?" What they forgot is that the God who put the galaxies into motion was sitting on that cushion. What they forgot is that the God who put the galaxies into motion has power over the wind and the waves. They shouldn't have been surprised. They should have been expectant that that's what he would do. They shouldn't have been caught off guard and terrified. They should have gone, "Oh yeah, of course." But they didn't. Because in that moment, the fear was bigger, and they only saw Jesus as teacher, not as Lord, not as God, not as the King of Kings, the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning, the end, all these things. They forgot who he was because of what they saw in their faces. This is what David writes about in Psalm 23. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Not for you're big and you're strong, because you're there. And when you're there, nothing else can touch me. It's what David writes in Psalm 56 that we read earlier. "What can mere mortals do to me?" If God is ultimate, if God is eternal, if God is the creator, the sustainer of all, if he has power over all, then truly, what do we have to fear? Truly, what do we have to be afraid of? What circumstances, what things can mess with us? Only the things we give the power to mess with us by fixing our eyes on them instead of on the King. We don't find peace by removing fear. Peace comes when we surrender to the King. For each one of us, throughout our lives, we pursue peace. We want peace. And yet for most of us, we pursue peace in a way that brings us a lack of it. Because we try to find it by changing the circumstances around us. But the circumstances around us, the people around us, the things that we experience in this life, we cannot control. At least not totally. What we need is not to remove those things. What we need to do is change where we look. When Peter sunk, he didn't sink because he wasn't on the water any longer. When the disciples were afraid in the midst of the storm, their fear didn't change because the storm changed. In fact, their fear continued. Our fear can change. We can come to a place of peace in this life, not by changing our circumstances, manipulating our circumstances, but rather by changing where we are focused. If you want peace that is ultimate, then you have to take your eyes off your fear and fix them on the King. That's it. You take your eyes off your fear and you fix them on the King. You change what you're looking at. You change what you're focused on. For some of us, that's easier to do than others, because it's a whole lot easier to do that when I'm burying my head in the sand than it is when the thing in front of me is overwhelming. But at the same time, when I just bury my head in the sand all the time, it's just me controlling it anyway. It's not me actually fixing my focus, is it? However it is that we deal with the things that scare us, however it is that we process them, however it is that we work through them, the reality is that we all, as people in our pursuit of peace, we try to deal with the things that scare us so that they no longer exist, when what Jesus says all along is, just look at me. Hey, it's okay, I'm here. Hey, I've got this. Hey, do you forget? Have you forgotten who I am? If I, as a dad, have the ability to calm my kids in the midst of a storm that, to be clear, I have no control over whatsoever, then how much more so might our Father in heaven be able to bring us peace in the moments that the storms in our lives are surrounding us? If Jesus was able to tell the wind and the waves to be quiet and they listened, then what can mere mortals do to us? See, what David is saying, what Peter forgot, what the disciples missed, is that the Lord, the Good Shepherd, the King of all kings, the Lord of all lords, the one who was and who is to come, the one who is ultimate, the one who is all powerful, he is our shepherd. He is not distant. He is not far. He is near. He calls us. He leads us. And when we follow him, when we take our eyes off the things that scare us and fix our eyes on him as the shepherd, as the authority in our lives, and when we day in and day out, moment in, moment out, refuse to fix our eyes on the things around us, but instead relentlessly work to fix our eyes on Jesus, we don't muster up peace. We're just given it. We just have it. Why? Because we're no longer trying to remove the things that scare us and that we have no control over. We allow them to remain, knowing that there is one who is bigger than them, who is with us. Ultimately, Psalm 23 is inviting us into something. David is inviting us into something. He's inviting us into a place where we acknowledge and where we live within the reality that the valley is real. The valley of the shadow of death, it is real. A life where enemies are present, where there are things that scare us, but peace is steady because our God is with us. Take a moment and imagine how your life might be different if you could walk through your valleys without being owned by your fear. If you could face the enemies that come without worrying that they're going to change your reality, where you weren't chasing peace through your own strength, your own power, your own skill, but rather you were trusting peace you already have access to because you're surrendered to the King. Take your eyes off what scares you, take your eyes off your fear, and fix them on the King. Because when the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Good Shepherd is with you, you will truly lack nothing. You will find green pastures and still waters, not because you found them, but because He's already brought you there. That when enemies are present, you will be able to know they are not ultimate, because only He is. And that ultimately you can have assurance that you will dwell with Him forever. And I don't know that there's any more peaceful thing we could have than the assurance that that shepherd, we have Him forever. Where every other thing, every other person in this life will fail us, He will not. Where every other thing, every other person will pass away. Where every other thing, every other circumstance we find will not be there in the end. The shepherd will. Faithful then, just as He is today. Good then, just as He is today, restoring our souls and bringing us peace, no matter what.